Hello, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to another exciting day. I'm very excited because I get to hang out with Lori today. I know you guys might be a little bummed not to hear Lauren, but I'll try to, hopefully you guys will say, Sadie, we're okay with you joining us today. So my name is Sadie Arabia, and I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the Los Angeles Regional SBDC. The SBDC is a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, helping to stimulate economic growth through business advising and development. We offer no-cost services to the local businesses through funding provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and from the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, GoBiz. The Los Angeles Regional Small Business Development Center Network serves small businesses throughout Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. We offer no-cost business advising, meaning you can meet one-on-one via phone or Zoom to address your specific needs and challenges. And we also offer virtual training, comprehensive workshops to help adapt and grow your business. So on that note, I get to see the gorgeous Lori today. Lori, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. And yes, everybody, Lauren is not feeling well today, but we got the wonderful Sadie. Sadie and I go back a long time, as I do with the SBDC. So Sadie, thank you so much for the introduction. And for everybody, I put in the link to sign up for the show, to view past shows. I know Lauren puts, Lauren takes care of everything. I don't pay as much attention, but I think she also puts those links in. I'm going to be talking about some webinars in a second that I'm going to be hosting, and Sadie will put that in as well. So let's get started because we got a lot to go over today. So first of all, I am going to be doing my financial literacy series in November, first week in December, and I may not pick it back up till February, just because I know everybody always says, if I miss this one, when will be the next one? I might not pick it up till February. Now, as I expressed, I started the session 2 as another kind of foundational understanding into what is it that you at least must know. I take an Excel document and I go through several different things. So if you take any of them out of order, that's fine. If you already got your QuickBooks and stuff set up, you might not need session 1, but session 2 and then session 3 taken in order does help, but it's not a requirement. Okay. My sales tax still coming out and telling people you need to know about sales tax, especially if you're using Shopify. A lot of people are making mistakes on this. So this webinar goes in, who needs to charge sales tax? Do you need to charge sales tax when making sales out of state? Gives you some of the background into these regulations. Also, I wanted to mention that I think it was, I'm losing dates, October, I had a legal structures webinar. Thank you to those who have joined me. This was an overwhelming hit. So I was talking about legal structures, what they mean, what are the tax implications, trying to clear up some of the myths. It was so popular that we're going to have that again. I haven't picked a date yet, but that's probably going to be up in January. But I wanted to let everybody know there's a repeat on that. Now, as far as upcoming shows, I put the link in there where you're going to be able to view all the upcoming shows because I've got more description on each of them here, so I'm not showing all of them. So next week, we're going to talk to Jules Hurst. And what's interesting is Jules Hurst is kind of along the etiquette. Remember those that are older, remember Dear Abby? I know a bunch of people on this are like, Lori, what are you talking about? Who is Dear Abby? But Dear Abby was this person that I remember when we had the newspaper, not the internet. I know I'm dating myself again, but we would say, what does Dear Abby say about this? Well, Jules is into etiquette, but she has a whole division of her company where she focuses on entrepreneurs and business negotiations and how to kind of respond to any situation you're facing, which as an entrepreneur can be myriad number of situations. So next week, we're going to talk with her and learn a bit. And then we're going to have Barney Santos on November 16th. Now, Barney has been an advisor with PCC, SBDC, just like myself for some time. I'm not even sure how long he's gone back on that, but he's still an advisor. It is wonderful working with him. And he started getting involved with Boulevard Market some time ago. And you may have remembered Sylvia Garcia started her company in Boulevard Market, and she went through their food hall business incubator. So Barney's been so busy, have had a really hard time getting him to have some free time, and he finally does. He's going to come on November 16th. He's going to talk about the incubator, talk about what he has done to help entrepreneurs. Real excited to hear from him on many different topics. And then Ario, one of our favorite that comes on the show quite a bit. I'm wanting to, in the end of November and the 2 weeks in December, because we're going to go dark the end of December, I want to focus on shows that start to get you ready for the new year. Marketing strategies, financial strategies. So Ario's going to kick this off. We're going to talk about developing a marketing strategy to prepare for 2023. 2023 sounds kind of strange to me, like I think I'm going to be dead in 2023. And I don't mean I'm going to die. What I mean is when I was a kid, I remember thinking 2000, oh, who's going to live in 2000? You know, you're not realizing that I would actually still be alive. So 2023 sounds very futuristic, but it's not, guys. It's around the corner, and we want to get started for that. We want to get prepared. And so I'm going to focus on getting prepared for 2023. Now, speaking about getting prepared, I am really excited to bring our guest on today. Xiomara is a certified human resource professional with over 15 years of HR experience across multiple industries. She specializes in helping small businesses remain in compliance with workplace regulations. And I wanted her to come on today to talk about some things that people aren't familiar with, some things they're confused about, a whole bunch of information. So Xiomara, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Lori. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's so good. I haven't seen you in a while. It's so good to see you. I want to start out by giving our audience a little bit of your background. Tell us, how did you get into HR? Did you grow up and say, I want to be an HR specialist? I'm feeling not, but you fill in the blank and tell us a little bit about the type of companies you work with.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was one of those nerdy college students. And from the onset, I knew I wanted to go into HR. I was majoring in psychology, and then I took a course in industrial psychology, which is a sister discipline to HR. And I just fell in love with the concept of applying psychology in the workplace and making the workplace more productive, things like that. So I pursued a job in HR right after college, and I landed in the healthcare industry for a local hospital here in the San Gabriel Valley, and got about 10 years of experience in healthcare. And after that, I thought, I want to see what else is out there. And so I worked for a professional employer organization. Many people know them as PEOs, and they mainly work with smaller businesses and clients to help them with administrative duties, including HR, safety, workers' comp, all the whole 9 yards. And I really fell in love with being able to help the small business owners, because I felt they were the most vulnerable and the people that really benefited the most from our expertise and appreciated the help the most.
I want to pick up a word you said, because this goes into how I personally feel about HR and small businesses, and that is vulnerable. And I feel so strongly, and I'll tell you, I'm going to start out by saying this. HR scares me to friggin' death. Okay. And I consult on tax, finance, and law. Okay. And HR scares me. And I get asked HR questions, and I know just enough to be dangerous, right?
Yes.
But you have to engage in it all the time to know exactly what is going on, right? Because it changes so much. So yeah. HR is what I'm wanting to do today, and we're going to get into it as we go through, is to really set a stage on how important it is for small companies to understand HR, because a lot of times they get in their head, I'm too small. That's not really, a concern of mine. We got to get rid of that myth right away, right, and then start to delve into something. So I thought we would start out by making a distinction between federal and state laws, because I find that small companies don't realize they're under two types of regulations and they
Right.
kind of blend them together. So why don't you start us off with anything commenting to what I've said so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a huge difference between the federal and the state laws. In our state, California, the laws are more stringent. So for example, in the federal state, we would have a law such as the American Disabilities Act. And that applies to employers with 15 or more employees. But in California, we have the Fair Employment Act, and that applies to employers with 5 or more employees. So it's always going to be more stringent. Federal requires overtime over 40 hours in a work week. In California, we have over 40 hours in a work week, but also over 8 hours in a day.
Yep. And which law supersedes? If you're in California, can I just choose to follow the federal law?
No, it's always going to be the state that's going to supersede. And in some instances, we also have local municipalities that have passed certain laws as well that would govern those employers doing business in those in the geographical boundaries of those locations.
See, and that's where I find that HR is a bit more confusing than even, I've just recently became an enrolled agent, certified by the IRS to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been working on it for a couple of years, but, so I can do tax returns and I can represent clients to the IRS. And with the IRS and the state, there's a similarity in it, not like the HR. It could be one thing and then one thing and then one thing completely different. So I find that I'm going to use a weird word that just comes, but HR laws are a little bit more discombobulated, where you got to kind of check so many different places to see what is the actual law. So speaking of confusing laws, I want to start with this. So I want to paint this picture for the people in the audience. Say that I have my company, I've been working in it, it's just been me, and then suddenly I'm so busy, I want to hire somebody. So I'm not ready for an employee, and I'm in California. Can I just hire an independent contractor?
Oh. Don't do it.
I know. So listen to this in the audience, guys, because too many people don't know about what you're going to learn. So what do I have to think about before I can just hire an independent contractor? What do I have to be aware of?
Yeah, so back prior to COVID, we had AB 5 that went into effect January 1 of 2020. And COVID just basically overshadowed how impactful this law was to employers, even small employers. So technically with this law, you can't just hire an independent contractor, and really almost nobody is going to be able to meet the criteria of being classified as an independent contractor, right? So what AB 5 did is it created a new test to be able to figure out whether this person is truly an independent contractor or they're an employee. So it's called the ABC test. And A is basically, is the worker free from control and direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work, both under contract and in fact, right? So what that means is that you cannot have someone sign off a contract saying they're an independent contractor, but then they're actually performing work that would be more of like an employee for you. So, and then we have B, which is that the worker performs the work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entities. So,
okay, so right there, Sadie, can you put that part B is the worker performs a task that is outside the usual course of business? And we'll repeat it if we need to, Sadie, because I know that's an earful. Because guys, part B is the scary new part. And that's why I just wanted to stop you for a second so everybody's got their ears. Part B is the scary new part that makes it almost possible. So I'm going to repeat it so Sadie's got it, that the worker, and tell me if I got it right, if I'm saying it verbatim, the worker performs a task that is outside the usual course of business. Keep going.
Yeah, so that, for example, would be a retail employer hires a plumber, right? Yep. They are outside of that entity's normal business. And then C is that the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as that being performed. So what that means is that if I'm an HR consultant and you hire me, I need to perform HR consultant work and not perform, something else, right? Not be a plumber or not work, marketing, designing your website. So it has to be, that business has to be established within the trade that you're hiring that person to perform the work. So that's the test, the ABC test. So if somebody meets the criteria, all three, A, B, and C, then this person is exempt from AB5, from the ABC test, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is that they are exempt from this test, but they are not exempt from the original test, which was called the Borrello test, which goes way back to like 1989. That was the original test for determining whether someone was an independent contractor. So if you've gone through the ABC test and you determine that, okay, yeah, this person satisfies all the criteria, now we got to fall back and go to the Borrello test. And the Borrello test really focuses on exerting control over the worker. Right, so is the hiring entity controlling their hours? Are they providing direction and instructions as to how the work needs to be performed? Is this person, does this independent contractor have their own tools? Are they performing the work on their own time? Yeah, it just basically has a big set of criteria that focuses a lot on having control over the worker. And that Borrello test, actually talking about the difference between federal and state laws, that Borrello test more closely aligns with the IRS independent contractor test.
Yep, absolutely. Now, and if I say anything, you correct me, because like I said, I know enough to be dangerous. But one of the things, and before I ask any more questions, what I like to tell people is that, and I'm going more in law, whenever a case has been tried, we then have a precedence, and we use that precedence to try another case, and also to give advice, because we can say based on a previous precedent, like even in representing a client to the IRS has strict rules that I as an EA have to bring precedence of my founding, right? So the AB5 has not been tried in court enough to have any precedence. So it's really hard sometimes when you get into these specific situations to say how the courts will decide. I like to say that just as my little fine print, right? So here's something I like to explain to people so they have more of an understanding. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. So if you say, hey, I can't answer that, we don't know, we don't have a precedent, you please say that, right? But here's the little silly examples I use just to communicate. So say I'm a yoga studio. I'm doing all my own yoga teaching, and here I'm being the client. Xiomara, I only need them to teach one class on Friday, so it's okay, right? They can be an independent contractor because it's only one yoga class on Friday. Surely I don't have to hire them, do I?
No, you absolutely do. Unless that instructor is going to teach a class and it's a one-time deal, like one and done, then that would be okay. They would be exempt from the AB5 test. But if this is a recurring thing where it's weekly on Fridays, this person is your employee.
And see, this is where, guys, I'm communicating to the audience. This is where it gets complicated because, and this is another way I like to explain it, and you may have a different way. Typically, we're wanting to hire an independent contractor because we're growing. So therefore, the reason we want to hire them is to help us to somehow either produce, deliver, service our growth, which is a usual course of our business. So it's pretty much shut down the ability to take a small company and grow it through independent contractors. Now, me, Lori, personal opinion, Lori, remember, I'm the finance person, right? So the finance person doesn't like numbers to reoccur on the balance sheet or the income statement, right? So when you look at and I'm a big cash flow, right? So when I look at, oh my God, I just have one one class that I want to offer every Friday because it's going to help me to grow my business. But suddenly I have to commit to an employee and workman's comp and all that. You could see I don't like to go that way. It's just logical financial. I don't like to go that way. So I see that now it's being forced that way. And so companies really need to understand that. So I welcome you to comment on anything I said, but where I want to go next is, okay, so that means I got to hire somebody. What does that mean? I know I'm opening a whole can of worms, but let's just keep going with general conversation. Let's keep
absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I want to add to your comments is that, you know, a lot of employers don't realize that they need to report the independent contractor to the IRS, the earnings to the IRS, and they also need to report it to the Employment Development Department, which is a great segue to going into what we do now if we are hiring an employee, right? We just became an employer. What steps, what do we need to do to be in compliance with being an employer?
And right before you go there, I want to step back on something you just said. So we all know about the 1099s and the fact that we are reporting independent contractors that we pay over $600 to the IRS, but you said also to the EDD. So that's a part that people aren't aware of. Can you highlight that before you go down into hiring? We're still on independent contractors, guys. I don't know if the number with EDD is also 600. You fill in the blanks for me. But say I am able to hire an independent contractor. What do I have to report to the EDD?
Yeah, you have to report. So if you do pay someone over $600, you do have to report to the EDD. It's called a new hire or a new worker report. And essentially what that report is for is to compare it to a list that EDD has from the Department of Child Support Services for parents that may be delinquent on child support. So you do need to report every time you contract an independent contractor or an employee. You need to report it to EDD within the first 20 days of that person's hire date.
You know, I didn't know that. I just learned something new, guys. So I knew about obviously the 1099 to the IRS. I didn't realize that the independent contractors reporting to the EDD because of the child care. I know other states do that, so I know what you're talking about. So I bet there's a lot of people out there that are doing a 1099, but not doing a report to the EDD, because when you say new hire, you automatically think employee. So that's a takeaway that we need to make sure, Sadie, if you can put in the chat, that independent contractors paid over 600 must also be reported to EDD. So now please continue with the when you hire somebody, but that was awesome for everybody to know.
Yeah, so that's for independent contractors. And also when you hire an employee, you do need to report it to the EDD, and it's separate reports. The employee one is called the DE34 form, which can be found on EDD's website. And then the one for independent contractor is the DE542 form that needs to be filed. But essentially, you also need to register with the Employment Development Department as an employer so you can pay for your payroll taxes. Right, that's what they're looking for unemployment insurance and state disability and the employment training tax. And what else? I'm missing one more, but that's what EDD is looking for. So you will need to register to create an account with EDD so that you can be remitting your payroll taxes to them on a quarterly basis.
Gotcha. Now here's a question. I think state disability insurance, that or SDI, that was the other tax. That's the other one. So here's the question. Say that I use a payroll company. Does the payroll company have a main account, or do I still set up my accounts with the EDD even if I hire a payroll company?
Yeah, the payroll company is going to manage your own account.
Okay.
So, yeah, your payroll company is still going to manage your own account for purposes of reporting payroll.
Gotcha. So the minute I plan to hire somebody, the first thing I got to do is get on that EDD website and set up myself as a business that's intending to hire and get all of my account information set up. Okay. So now I hired somebody, I got the account information, I'm done. That's all I got to worry about, right?
No. No, 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 no. So now you have to go through, there's several forms. Well, obviously, I would hope everybody knows that they have to have workers' comp insurance.
Yeah,
And that
please.
is,
And some people don't. They don't realize this. Now, when you're, and I'm going to clarify because if people get this on legal, if I'm an S corp and I am the owner employee and I have no other employees, then S corps when you're just the owner, no. But the minute you hire an employee, what if I hire a half-time? Can I not have workman's comp? What if I hire him for one day? Can I not have workman's comp?
everybody needs to be covered
Yes,
under your workers'
everybody.
comp insurance, and it is a $10,000 penalty
Yes.
for every violation. So
Thank
it
you
can
for
add
telling
up
them that.
pretty quickly. And that's why it's so important not to misclassify your employees or your workers as independent contractors, because essentially it's a violation of every single law, every single employment law in California. Workers' compensation, paid sick leave, you're depriving them from potential overtime and their meal and rest periods, time. You know, the list goes on and on and on, right? So,
Yeah.
so
And and as we say that, I'm gonna talk about one of those challenging things. I'm going to say a challenging thing. So what she's saying is so important, guys, because if you got caught misclassifying, all of these specific penalties would come to you. So, and you know where I'm going with this, Xiomara, but I'm just going to close down my corporation and then I won't be responsible for those penalties, right? I got to say that. You know where I'm going with this. Guys,
yes,
pay attention to this. What
yes.
happens if I break the law and I close down my corporation? Do I walk away safe?
No,
Yeah.
all your personal assets are at risk, right?
Yes.
And we
Thank
just
you.
haven't.
Because oh, sorry, I have had people who have accidentally, I'd say accidentally, they didn't do it on purpose, right? But they did not properly have the systems in place to get the right payroll taxes resubmitted, et cetera. And it is then a civil liability against them. They are personally responsible. The corporate veil does not protect you from these. And I really wanted people to know that. So thank you so much. Okay, so I've hired somebody, I've set up my EDD account, I got my workman's comp. What else do I have to do?
Okay, so the next thing you have to do is you need to make sure that this person is authorized to work in the United States. So you would do that by completion of the employment eligibility form, which is a federal mandate. It's the I-9 form that every single employee, if you've ever been an employee somewhere else, I'm sure you've completed that. And you need to supply documents that are listed on the form. You can't require somebody to give you specific documents. That's a violation of the law. But what you can do is you can provide them the list that comes with the form and say, hey, these are the acceptable documents. Can you show me proof, or can you provide these documents within 3 business days of that person actually starting to perform work for you?
And that I-9, if I'm not mistaken, the last couple of years has been updated and has some more strict rules upon it. I remember the I-9 being a hot topic. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's still a hot topic. The form gets updated every few years. And so on the top right-hand corner, you'll see the version that is either current or the expiration date of the form. So make sure that when you're filling it out, it's not expired, that it's
Gotcha.
a current form.
Now, to clarify, we got a question in the audience, and I want to clarify this because this could be a confusion. And I'll just read the question, and then you'll be able to clarify it. That means all independent contractors need to have workman's comp insurance policy. No, let's clarify that.
So independent contractors, when you classify someone as an independent contractor, it is assumed that this person has their own workers' comp policy, and hence that's why you wouldn't cover them under your workers' comp policy per se. So that is why it would be a huge violation of the law if you misclassified somebody and were not providing workers' compensation to them.
Got it. Yeah. And for clarification from the Lori finance perspective, this is why I am not, me personally, was not a big fan of the law, because it forces you immediately, even if you have just one person coming on temporary, to hire him as an employee, which causes the workman's comp to have to be purchased, which you would not have had to if it was an independent contractor. So that's why it wasn't like a tiny little increase in cost and regulation. It's a big step. You're here, and then you got to step up. And so I think about a lot of times the companies are kind of little children yet, little babies, right? But they got to step into the big adult world really quickly when they want to bring on help.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because this was a huge challenge. I remember for a lot of small business owners when AB5 went into effect, it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to comply, but it came down to the workers' compensation cost that they were going to incur. And, you know, some businesses would tell me, like, I will probably go out of business if I have to get workers' compensation for the people that I have as independent contractors. You know, so people had to strategize and figure out a way how to work with their finances to be able to convert those independent contractors as employees.
Yeah, and you know, we'll leave AB5 in a second, but I want to just bring in one other last thing, and this is something I personally noticed, but my underlining concept that I'm wanting to communicate is that you really do have to be careful, because we are looking at checking this a little bit more than they did, because it came out right when COVID hit. And so it got put kind of on the sideline, if you will, but it's back and present. And you know, something that I seen during COVID, and this goes back a little bit, when they had the pandemic unemployment assistance program, some independent contractors, when they filed for the unemployment, they mistakenly put the company they were working with, their client in essence, named down instead of their company. And EDD did checks. I had people contact me and go, I got this letter from EDD. What does it mean? And I went, not good, because they're saying you should have changed them. You didn't, and they're getting them for misclassification. So there are ways that this can be identified, and the ramifications are severe. And the last thing I'm going to ask you to comment on AB5 before we leave it is, I get people that are a little bit confused saying, I went to the polls and we struck it down with Uber, so AB5 doesn't exist. So let's clarify those, and then we'll go totally into the employee realm.
Yeah, AB5, I mean, Prop 22 with Uber and Lyft and all the gig drivers, that's actually, I mean, that went through when everybody voted for it. Not everybody, but the majority of people voted for it. But even now, it's still pending, because recently a judge reviewed that, and the reason why the judge reviewed it was because the unions are contesting the legality of that law, because they're disputing and saying, well, if people, you know, it neglects people the right to form a union. So that's, you know, that's kind of in the works. It's not a clear shot as to where we stand on that. But going back to the employee, what you would do as an employee. So once you basically have authorization that this person is able to work in the United States, you also need to complete a set of forms that are required by all employers to be completed. One of them is the notice to employee. That's the short term, or the short name of the form. It's the wage theft notice to employee. So that's a form that's required by the Department of Industrial Relations, and it essentially is more of like a kind of like when you make a job offer letter to an employee. It's going to tell the employee what the employer's legal business name is, what their rate of hire is, how often they're going to be paid, what your workers' comp insurance policy is, and it's also going to ask you to list the paid sick leave policy that you currently have in place to provide to employees. As you know, it's the law in California for all employers to provide 3 days or 24 hours of paid sick leave to their employees, and that's all employees regardless of their status. So that form is basically kind of like ensuring that you are in compliance with all those items there.
And is that form given to the employee then? And is that that's a California form?
Yeah, that's a California form that is given to the employee, and then the employer gets to keep a copy for the personnel file.
Gotcha.
And that's important to have that form because, knocking on wood, I would never want to see anybody sitting at the labor commissioner's office. But I have had the unfortunate experience to be there with employers, and this form is the very first form they will ask for when an employee submits a claim. Because they want to make sure that you have been in compliance. And the other thing they're going to ask for is your workers' comp insurance information. So, you know, knocking on wood, nobody ever has to go to the labor commissioners, but if they do that, this is why it's important to have all this documentation in place, right? It's so easy to hire somebody and bring them on board and then just get them on the payroll system and, you know, skip all the paperwork. But you know, this is where it matters, right? If for some reason this person ends up filing a claim against you, these forms are going to be what's going to save you.
You know, here's another new one. I didn't know about that. Well, like I said, I don't focus on the HR, but I didn't even know about that form coming up. And, you know, I've been around this stuff for a bit, so I wasn't even aware of that one. And this is all before we even start determining payroll and taxes and all this. This is just the basic form. So while we're on forms, there was two things that I get a lot of questions, and that is the requirements of an employee handbook. And then also, and this, I could be wrong, but I just recently heard, well, just recently in the last year, you know, the employee posters that everybody's supposed to have.
Yes.
So I kind of, in my own little mind at one point in time, thought, well, I guess if I have virtual people, I don't have to. And then I found out, no, you have to have a website with those posters up. So let's talk about handbooks and the poster requirement that a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. So the handbook, it's not a legal requirement for employers to have. However, there are some policies that the employer has to have in place. Okay, so some policies are required by law, but the handbook itself is not. So you have your sexual harassment policy that's required by law. We have a lactation accommodation policy that's required by law. Now, since you're going to provide those policies, you're going to have to provide the California Family Rights Act policy, which basically states it's not required, but if you do provide other policies, you have to provide it as well. So that's required. And then we have the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity policy, that's a requirement as well. So those policies are required. It is best practice, though, to have an employee handbook because, again, knocking on wood, but if you are sitting in front of the labor commissioner, God forbid you're sitting in front of a judge due to litigation, they're going to want to know what your practice was. What was your policy in regards to whatever the employee's allegations are? What was your policy for attendance? So this person says you fired them because of attendance. What was your policy? You know, I saw one scenario one time. I had a client, they were in the construction industry, and based on their industry, it was their practice not to, when somebody called out sick, not to schedule them the next day, not to assume they were going to be there so they wouldn't compromise the work, right? So they would have somebody else covering. And what this person one time that called out sick and didn't get scheduled filed a retaliation claim against the employer. And what really saved that employer was to be able to show their attendance policy, and their practice was that they assumed this person was going to call out sick the next day, and it wasn't in retaliation to this person actually calling out sick. It was more like due to their operations. So those are the reasons why it's important to have your employee handbook and have it up to date. You want to review it and update it every year, no more than like every 2 years, to go without revising and updating your employee handbook.
Yeah, I've always felt like they're very important. You've explained it perfectly. So with this, this is where we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, by the way. So I want to just thank you, even midterm, for bringing this information up, because this is really important. So where we're getting and where I'd like to go now, and just kind of little jaunt to the side, obviously, just like I am, everybody's like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, right? I'm overwhelmed and I'm not even hiring anybody. And I knew part of it that I'm already so overwhelmed. So where we're going with a lot of the questions now is having somebody you hire to come in and handle this. And Xiomara, one of my big things is when I talk, having somebody come in to handle, whether it's your finance, your legal, or whatever, you got to make sure the person you bring in is able to do it properly, because it's your butt still on the line. So we want to talk about, from a payroll company to, do they handle this or this? What do I need to make sure? And we're getting a lot of questions about temporary agencies. If I go through a temporary agency, or if I hire somebody just seasonal, does that change? So the three things are hiring somebody so I don't have to do any of this, right? And then if it would just a payroll company, what if I just use a temp agency? That's where a bunch of questions are coming. I know that's a mouthful, but take it from there.
Yeah, with staff, I'll start with the staffing agencies, because it's an interesting employment relationship. So the fact that you're using an employee from a staffing agency doesn't necessarily get you off the hook, if you will. You still have the responsibility to make sure that employee is trained on sexual harassment, that employee is still able to be authorized to work in the United States. And that is something the staffing agency should do, but you as the employer contracting or hiring through the staffing agency, or let's say leasing employees, you're still on the hook. If for some reason the staffing agency is out of compliance, then guess what? You're also out of compliance with that. So it doesn't mean that you're off the hook. We live in California, so one way or another, it's gonna get you. So be very careful. If you are, and we saw this become a predominant practice during COVID-19. So many people going through staffing agencies because, just the workforce was fluctuating so much. But it doesn't negate your diligence to be able to check with the staffing agency, make sure that they are being in compliance with all of these mandates.
Yeah, and I always say that when it comes to your finance, when it comes especially to HR, don't look for the cheapest place. People say, well, you know what, I don't know if this is necessarily true or not, so you can give me yours. And I come from doing a lot of turnarounds years ago. So I'm going on my old information when I would come in and do a turnaround. I always went with ADP, or I would also go with Paychecks, which was prominent. But I'm not saying ADP is great or perfect or anything, but they have individuals that are there. This is my belief. I want you to correct everything I'm saying if it's wrong, but they do have individuals on staff that are supposed to be specialists in each state. So they're more custom to state laws. And my experience with ADP has been crossed because I come in all these different companies as the CFO, and then I had to, speak to ADP, is that when I would come in and try to figure out what was going on in the company, I wanted to check that they were in regulation. I was able, when they had ADP, I was at least able to get somebody on the phone, and a lot of times they were bringing things up. No, that they're not doing this, they're not doing this. So I felt as though they were a little bit more proactive. Now it's still the company, it's still the owner, but they were a little bit more proactive in looking into what could be the problems, where I had some other people use some of these payroll companies that have just emerged in the last couple of years. And one of them said, oh, well, you could put them on a salary, but do it an hour. I mean, weird stuff. So let's talk first payroll. Do you have any distinctions you make? I used ADP, so we'd have a name to talk about. I'm not getting endorsed by ADP. I'm not representing ADP. All the fine print. It's just they've been around and they're big
for the longest time.
So
they have been around for the longest time. They are pretty reliable, and they do have quite some experts. They're nationwide. So you make a very, very valid, good point there. When I look at payroll companies, and what I tell my clients is, number one, make sure that either they are based out of California,
Yep.
or that, they are familiar with California wage and hour law, because so many of these payroll companies have their payroll teams based out of other states, or even based like abroad,
Yeah.
based in other countries, and they just are clueless when it comes to the wage and hour labor laws here in California. They're their own animal. Just even us being in California, just when we think we know and we've been practicing what we know, we get hit with, nope, that's actually not the way that it should have been done, and it's retroactive, and so now it's everything out of compliance. I mean, you just want to make sure that they are savvy and aware, and California knows California. I can't stress it enough.
In California, it's not intuitive. It's not like a common sense logic, like someone in another state would say, hey, don't forget to check on this. Some of these laws are so different and specific, you wouldn't even know about them unless you were studying. Like you told me things today I wouldn't have known if I wasn't. So payroll and now will the payroll company handle the I-9? So I can just say, oh, payroll, I hired a payroll company, I'm done, everything's handled.
They won't handle the I-9, although some of the payroll companies have a onboarding portal where they basically are able to upload all these required forms for the employee to fill out. But it's in the I-9 world, in the eyes of the USCIS, it's not in compliance unless you have physically viewed the documents the employee has presented. Now, they made an exception during COVID, for those people that were working remotely, but now that's gone, and so people that were hiring remotely now had to go back and audit all their records and make sure that they actually have physically viewed those documents for the I-9 forms. So that's something that's in the works, and I think that eventually they're looking to like being able to make it like a virtual thing where you can see the documents virtually. But until then, the best practice is for you to actually be able to make sure you're viewing those documents, because that's what you're signing off when you sign on that form, is that you are certifying that you have viewed those documents and they appear legitimate to you.
That's what I remember about the I-9. That was it, that you have to see them. And they were saying, well, what if I hire people in other states and I can't see them? Now I remember what was really being discussed in the last couple. And let's make a clarification, because I'm getting a lot of questions. Well, does this count for seasonal, or does this count for this? When we talk about these things, an employee, and correct me if I'm wrong, employee is an employee under these rules. It doesn't matter if it's part-time, 1 day, seasonal. A lot of these rules, and most of them we're speaking of, impact anybody that you are hiring as employee. There's not these separate rules if I'm only hiring them every once in a while.
No, that's correct. That is correct. You're correct on that. One thing I want to stress about payroll companies and hiring workers is that the employers, the businesses, you want to make sure that you get employees onto the payroll system right away, right? Because I've seen scenarios where they'll hire a worker, but necessarily won't get them on into the payroll system. So it's not, this person is not in the payroll, it's not in the books. And then this person gets injured, or I think, something happens. I had a client that had a fatality, and this worker wasn't on their payroll system, and they didn't get paid. Their family didn't get paid for workers' comp insurance, and it was just a horrible thing. So one thing I do want to stress is that when you have these payroll companies, you need to get these workers onto your payroll system right away before they start working for you.
What I always like to say too, Xiomara, is a lot of people have had the experience being an employee, and a lot of, I'm talking about the small companies, and a lot of small companies have had the experience being an employee in a large corporation. Where I'm going with this is, Remember the process. You went into the HR office, you signed all these forms, and they wouldn't let your start day until the forms are signed. You signed up for payroll. I mean, they had all of these rules that you may or may not really have been aware of. So what I like to emphasize is that you being the company owner, you must behave like the large corporation. I like to express that, yes, we are small businesses, but when it comes to HR, don't delineate like that. Don't think I'm a small business. Think you're a large employer because you must behave like one.
Yeah, and they're being treated like a large employer, right? All these laws that are being implemented and starting to apply at the 5-employee count. I mean, for example, with the California Family Rights Act, and the people, employees can take up to 12 weeks of leave time. That's something that used to apply to employers with 50 or more employees. So it came all the way down to, those with at least 5. So more and more, that's the trend we're seeing, that these laws are trickling down all the way to the little guys, to the smaller employers.
Very good point to make. And we're getting a couple questions, and I'm going to tell you my opinion on it, and you tell me yours. I get a couple questions is, well, where can we get, I get this all the time on everything, where can I get the checklist that I'm going to be in compliance, right? And my answer, and I'm going to let you answer, and I get asked this about finance and taxes as well. And my first answer is there is none. There is none. And my second answer is, if you find one, run away from it. Don't get a false belief. There is no checklist. And the thing is, people say, why is there no checklist? And one of the things I emphasize is because this, is confusing. Just like finance and tax, these are not easy things, and it's changing all the time, and it's situational. So there is no checklist. So you really have to me, you either have to commit to be fully on top of this all the time, which I'm not, or you have to hire professionals. And so I say, before you get to the point of choosing to hire an employee, and this is my last finance statement, and I'll send it to you, Xiomara, is that you want to really look at can you afford every single aspect, including getting the professional services and help, because you may be better off reducing your sales, not bringing on a new customer and staying where you are for a while than jumping into this next step. Too many people, to me personally, believe, oh, I'm getting busy, so I'm going to, I have brand new people with ideas and I'm going to hire an employee. I'm like, whoa, wait. And so my answer is,
don't jump.
I know there is no checklist. Don't trust the checklist, and make sure you really have the finances to support this decision before you go there. And it's net income that matters. So less sales, that's me in my world. Less sales is even better. But answer the checklist on, that was my answer for the checklist.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is no checklist. I mean, there are the requirements. And I think the closest thing that I can think of that I can leave with everybody is the closest thing that's going to guide you is the Department of Industrial Relations website. They will have, AKA the Labor Commissioner. So they will have all information in regards to employment and all those things. But we also have the other entities such as EDD that also have their own requirements as well. And they don't necessarily cross-reference each other sometimes. So there is no checklist. And even when there is a checklist, it's ever evolving, right? Because we're being asked to comply with new requirements. For example, this new hire reporting with EDD, it's something that's fairly new. I think it went into effect maybe 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. It didn't exist before. So just as an example of how things do evolve, to your point. And then one thing I forgot to mention earlier was about the posters that you touched on, and you also can get those posters from the Department of Industrial Relations website, but there are federal and state posters that you need to be able to comply with. And if you don't have a posting board, then you either need to email them to the employees or put them on like a shared drive and let everybody know that they are there available for them to view at any time.
I know, see, that was the part that when I read that, I went, oh yeah, okay, wow, that's interesting. Now, speaking of it changing all the time, I don't even know what this is, but you mentioned in 2023, there's going to be probably more than we're going to even be ready for new laws, but there's one coming out around the corner. What's coming out around the corner that we need to be aware of?
One very important law that I want to share with everybody is this new law that's going to require employers with 15 or more employees, and smaller employers keep an eye and start preparing and working for this, because it's likely going to trickle down to you, is that now employers have to disclose the pay scale or the pay range on job postings effective January 1, 2023. And they also have to disclose the pay scale to their current employees if the employer requests a pay scale. So that's, yeah, that's an interesting one. We're also going to have an increase in minimum wage for those smaller employers. So what we're considered smaller employers, those with 25 or less employees. Now the minimum wage for them is going to be $15 an hour, as opposed to $14.50 where they were this year.
Gotcha.
And that's also going to apply to salary workers. So people that you work exempt, the minimum wage for them is going to go up to $64,480 annually and $5,373 with 33 cents monthly. So both of those need to be met. Both the monthly and the annual salary need to be met. So you couldn't pay somebody like $1,000 the first 3 months and then pay them the remaining of the salary. You have to meet the monthly minimum salary of the $5,373 with 33 cents.
And did you notice, guys, she said monthly minimum salary, because a lot of times people think, oh, well, I can avoid the hourly minimum wage by paying a salary and I can pay whatever I want. And that's not true. So I'm glad you said that. So while we talk about monthly, we can pay somebody what? We can pay them monthly, we can pay them weekly, bi-weekly. A lot of people get confused on that. What do we, because can I just say I'll pay you in 2 months?
No. And actually, I'm going to be having some webinars coming up with the Pasadena SBDC, and we're going to take a deep dive into like payroll setup and all these things, becoming an employer. So keep an eye out for that. But the requirement is that you have to pay employees twice a month. So whether you do it every other week, or if you do it like twice a month, like on the 15th of the month or at the end of the month, right? So if you do decide to do the twice a month, the payroll has to run from the 1st through the 15th and be paid out by no later than the 22nd of the month. And then the second pay period has to run from the 16th through the end of the month and paid no later by the 10th of the following month.
Perfect. In fact, that's where I saw ADP come through for a company that I was just doing some consulting with, and they were not doing that. And ADP was like, no, you can't. We will not set you up that way. Yeah. So that's where, and you know, you said something I was just about to say, which is perfect. I was wanting everybody to know that you are an advisor at the Pasadena SBDC. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Annie, shout out if Annie's on the call, if you could put in the Pasadena information. Sadie, I don't know if you have that available to you right now, but if Annie's on this call, could you do a shout out into the chat? And if not, we at least have that. I will announce it next week, because look at Annie, love you. Everybody go to the chat. Annie just put in the upcoming webinar. Excellent. So guys, that's how you can get in touch with Xiomara. You can reach out to the Pasadena SBDC. We also have her personal information that Sadie put in. Xiomara, I'll tell you what, I have got to ask you to come back on, because I cannot get over all the questions. And guys, some of the questions were so specific, they really need a that's one-on-one to actually go through with them.
I told you we could talk 2 hours about this stuff.
We really could. And it's interesting because it's something that years ago I would, because I did the turnaround, I would touch it a bit. I knew what had to happen, right? And about 3 years ago, I was like, oh, no, not touching that, because I knew it got so complicated, because it used to be with the smaller companies, they were exempt from so much, right? So I didn't really have to worry about so much, but like you said, it's getting smaller and smaller numbers. 5 employees, you have to start being aware of some of this, if not smaller, from what I know. So
Yeah.
it's really important.
And, one disclaimer I want to give out on the minimum wage too, I forgot to mention this, is that this is the state's minimum wage. But again, some local municipalities and cities have their own minimum wage and have their own pay sick leave requirements. So it does get a little convoluted if you have workers that perform at least 2 hours of work there in those areas, etc. So definitely do feel free to reach out. If you have questions, I'd be happy to help. This is complicated. I think, human resources is the part that is the most neglected from businesses. They just think, well, I'm just going to hire somebody and this person's going to like do the work and make my business a little bit more profitable. And I would tell you that your human resources is like probably one, up there, like one of the key components of running your business if you're going to be hiring workers. Definitely not one you want to neglect.
It
For
does.
sure.
And, I always tell everybody every single decision in your company begins with a financial decision. And I can't emphasize how much this begins with a financial decision with a lot more wiggle room than a lot of people are hiring. So before we close today, I just want to mention briefly the websites, the government websites. You mentioned a few because I know it's kind of all over. You go to the IRS for some information, you go to EDD, you go for the Department of Industrial Relations, if I get that right.
Yeah.
What other websites or government keywords should people, and I'm not saying go to somebody's blog, guys, I'm saying go to the horse's mouth, the government websites. Any others you can know about?
You can go to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. They actually just changed their name to the California Civil Rights, I think, agency or Civil Rights Department. So they just changed their name, and you want to go there for also some posting compliance, but they are the ones that govern the sexual harassment stuff. So they will have the sexual harassment, they have a sample sexual harassment training that's free for everybody. So if you have employees that need to take it, you can use theirs. And you can also go to the so EDD, right? I think everybody got that one, and the DIR. Those are the ones, those are the main 3 that would go to. The IRS as well. You'll need to register as an employer with them at the same time to register on with EDD. So those are the ones I can think of right now.
Well, what I'm going to do is, for anybody that didn't get the information to sign up for the Pasadena SBDC webinar, I'm going to pick up that information. I'm going to start advertising it in my next show. So we're going to include that. We're going to repeat and repeat. So guys, get to that webinar. It's going to be great. Xiomara, I'm going to look into February and ask you if you will come back on the show, because
absolutely,
this
my
is
pleasure.
So important. I mean, you don't see the chat, but it's going crazy. Thank you, thank you, thank yous. A bunch of thank yous. These are very, very important.
You're very
topics.
welcome. Yeah,
So,
very welcome. My pleasure.
Extremely appreciative of you coming on. And Annie, thanks for watching my back and throwing the webinar in there. Please, guys, sign up for that webinar, get more detail on this, become aware. Even if you're not ready to hire, know what you could be getting yourself into so you can make good decisions. It doesn't even need that you're hiring somebody. It's, I'm wondering whether I should. This is another good reason to take that. So Xiomara, thank you again for your time. Sadie, thank you for filling in with Lauren, and to my frequent flyers. Emma, I saw you said hello, and all my other frequent flyers that come every week. Thank you so much. And we had some high numbers, so I had new people on the show. Thank you to the new people, and I hope to see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Have a nice day.